Hi, I'm Jaclyn.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome back. We have another evening episode for you guys. I don't know why that really matters to you, but it's different to us, so I don't know, feel the need to point it out, I guess.
We're lacking on banter, so
yes,
we gotta come up with something.
I mean, we're going on month 3 of COVID-19 isolation, so things to talk about are just, there's a shit show of things to talk about in the world in general, but, for our banter section, we try to keep it a little uplifting, which is a struggle right now, so.
Yeah, there's not much to say that's happy.
Yeah. Well, what is happy, we did our Patreon Google Hangout today, and so that was a good time, so if you would be interested in doing a virtual hangout with us, you can go to patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes. If you are willing, able,
if you have money that you're just wanting to throw around, you can throw it at us.
Yeah, we are always down for that, and we will throw it right back into this podcast, and
we'll throw it into making better banter. We'll think of something.
Maybe it'll spark something, maybe. I don't know. Maybe not. You'll get some other fun perks. Like right now we're getting our quarterly gifts ready for our patrons. So look for that on our Instagram if you want to see what you could be getting if you joined our Patreon.
Yeah, and hopefully by the time this comes out, I will be able to have shipped those out to those people. So hopefully that'll happen.
It's a little difficult when we record like a couple weeks ahead of time because, especially in the year 2020, where in 2 weeks from now, who knows what the hell is going to be happening in the world.
Yeah, we have a dust storm coming our way. Did you see that?
Yeah,
all that dust.
I did see that.
And there was a news article and it made me laugh because it was like, you may have trouble breathing, but it's going to make for beautiful sunsets. It was like, it's gonna really make the air quality bad, and if you have asthma, you should probably stay inside, but the sunset, man, it's gonna be beautiful.
But it's gonna be so pretty. We're gonna have a dust storm in the middle of a global pandemic for a respiratory virus, but also the sunset's gonna be great, so worth it.
They were trying to make it positive.
Oh boy. That's all you can do, right?
Speaking of positive, so during this time, Kevin and I have, rewatched The Office. We're rewatching How I Met Your Mother now. I want happier, lighthearted stuff. So Kevin's sitting on the couch and he's like, "Hey, do you want to watch Saving Private Ryan?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Is it funny?" And he just looks at me and he's like, "Do you know what it's about?" And I was like, "Saving Private Ryan?" And he's like, it's not funny. I was like,
it's not a funny movie.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Clearly Courtney has not seen that movie.
Yeah. He likes all these depressing movies. One of the first movies we watched during this quarantine was Fight Club, which I literally had to watch it in 2 sittings because I'm like, look, mental health is not great right now in general, thinking the world can end. I don't think I need to watch Fight Club right now.
Yeah, it's probably not the best palate cleanser mental health break. What is, though, is Naked and Afraid. So Andrew and I have been watching a lot of Naked and Afraid because we went to the mountains last weekend for our anniversary. So in the Airbnb that we were staying in, we don't have cable at home, and so they had cable there, and we couldn't get any of our streaming stuff connected because the Wi-Fi was really slow. So we're like, okay, well, I guess we'll see what's on cable, and so we just stumbled upon Naked and Afraid, and then we found out it's on Hulu, so we've continued watching it now that we're at home. And it's a good palate cleanser, so check it out.
Yeah, I love to repeat things my dad says because my dad is the funniest man in the entire world.
He is.
And he one time was talking about it because he likes to put that on too because when he works, he likes to have the TV on and just have something running in the background. And he was like, "Trust me, there's nothing sexy about it." He's like, "Trust me."
And your dad is not wrong. But it is pretty entertaining. You got some survivalist stuff. You got some people drama. You get to see some animals. Sometimes they get eaten. But,
Yeah, and speaking of the mountains and animals, I just realized I have to tell the podcast my hiking story.
Yes, let's hear it.
So, Kevin and I was like, Kevin, I just want out of this apartment. Like, I just want to go to the mountains. So we're trying to drive around because we live really close to, like, the Smoky Mountains. And so we're driving up there and we're trying to find somewhere that's not crowded with people, all this stuff. So each trail we go to has been a fail. Like, there's parking, like, you have to park like a mile away on not even a parking spot. So we finally find this trail and there's a parking spot. It's perfect. So we start walking, and I was like, this is so nice. No one's here. And Kevin's like, I know. It's like we're really in nature. And then all of a sudden we hear this really loud noise. It kind of sounded like a rattling, but I feel like logically it probably wasn't. But definitely maybe some hissing. And I looked down and it's like the biggest snake I have ever seen. I mean, it was probably like 4-5 feet long. I mean, easily like 6 inches belly wide. And it's like hissing. And Kevin was in front of me and he said he was like, okay, I'm going to go around it. And he turned around and I was like, halfway gone. I was like,
nope, I'm out of here.
Like, I'm sorry, I can't. Nope, I don't like snakes. And yeah, we looked it up later and apparently that trail, like, people see snakes and bears all the time. And I'm like, I'm really glad we turned around.
You're like, that's probably why no one was there, because they're like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, I've never seen a snake, like, that big. I've only seen, like, the little, like, garden snakes, you know, like those little tiny, like, annoying things. But this one was so big, and I was like, not doing it.
I don't know. I lived in front of a bunch of woods, and so I've seen a bunch of, like, not, like, dangerous snakes. They're just, like, the giant black snakes that you're like, you are so big. Like, I know you're, like, good and all, but I also don't really enjoy looking at you. We also had a snake experience on our mountain trip. So we went on a hike that was supposed to be like a 6-mile hike, and it ended up being like 10 miles because the signs aren't marked very well. So we didn't know that we'd passed where we were going, and we just kept going. And then eventually we're like, okay, we're like looking at our map and we're like, this is supposed to be like a 3.5-hour hike, and we've already gone like over 2 hours and we haven't turned around yet. So I'm pretty sure we went too far. But
yeah.
And then when I like looked on my Fitbit later to like track the steps, it was like almost 10 miles. So I'm like, oh, whoops. But on the way back, which at this point, so it took us 5 hours. So as we were like walking back, we're like less than a quarter mile from back where we were supposed to go. And this like giant black snake just like crosses the path in front of us. My husband is terrified of snakes. Completely terrified. And so I see it and I'm like, oh God, I don't want to like panic him. And so I just like put my arms out like straight. Like, because he was behind me. So I just, like, I stopped and I, like, put my arms out. And he was like, what? And I was like, it's fine. And he's like, what? And then he, like, sees it. And then he, like, yells and turns around and runs the opposite direction. And then I'm like, well, we have to get back to our car, so you have to walk around it. So thankfully he was just kind of moseying on his way. And he went back to where he was going. And, you know,
yeah,
it was fine.
Yeah, Kevin and I were saying, like, we wish we knew snakes more, because I'm like, I don't know what kind of snake this is. Like,
yeah.
I thought it was green. Kevin thought it was yellow. We don't really know. I wasn't too busy getting a full examination of it. But I also heard it, like, I heard it before I saw it. So I'm like, if it's hissing, I feel like it thinks it's threatened. And so it's, like, yelling. And I'm like, I'm out.
You're like, I don't want you. Like, the one that we saw, he didn't hiss, but he, like, opened his mouth, like, he, like, raised his whole body and his mouth up, and I'm like, okay, and then he just, like, kept going. So I'm like, I think he was like, nope, back off, I'm just going over here to eat some things.
Yeah, it was so loud, because I didn't even see it until I heard it, but yeah, I mean, both of us said it sounded like a rattle, but there's so few, like, rattlesnakes in Smoky Mountains. I looked it up, so I'm
That's
like,
why I was like, I don't
really know. Like, there's a few that can rattle.
Okay.
But I don't really know, like, I don't have enough evidence to say if it did or not, but it was a very, like, distinctive, because it didn't sound like a hiss. It was just this weird noise, and I was just like,
You're like, no, I don't care what noise it is or what kind of snake, I'm just gonna
Yeah, so it was a 0.2-mile hike, because I fled the scene.
She was
very
like,
quickly.
nope, I'm out of here. Oh, boy. So this episode is going to be another 2-parter. Not to plug our Patreon again so early, it wasn't intended, but just a reminder that our Patreon subscribers do get parts 1 and 2 the same day, and then you'll get a bonus episode the next week. So if you guys hear this and you want to immediately hear part 2, you can just head on over to our Patreon so you can get that ASAP. If not, you'll get part 1 this week, and then next week we'll finish up with part 2, because there is just way too much for this case to fit into one episode.
Yeah, I know we've done a few kind of different episodes the past few weeks. We had some espressos, we had some like back and forth with vigilante and haunted houses, but we're back to the basics here. We're back to sharing a story, both telling it.
Yep.
Back to the original.
We are. So, because I wrote a lovely little intro, I'm going to do my intro before I do my sources.
Okay.
So, okay. From November of 1989 to November of 1990, 6 bodies and 7 abandoned vehicles were found off of various interstates in Florida. All of the victims were male, white, middle-aged, and most were found partially or fully naked. All of the vehicles were found quite a distance from their owner's body, had been ransacked of all belongings, and were wiped down completely. A huge manhunt would lead police to the first woman to ever fit the FBI's definition of a serial killer. So.
Ooh.
Yes. So this week.
Who is it? Who are we doing?
Who are we doing? We are doing Aileen Wuornos this week, guys. So.
We did it. We're doing the damn thing.
We're doing it. And it.
To quote Beyonce.
Yes. And it was quite a ride. So.
It was. It was.
Oh.
I don't know. It's. No words for it. Yep. It's crazy.
So we read a couple of books. So Courtney read one book and I read the other, and they had some differing accounts. So we have noted where they differ some, because with Eileen, there's a lot of different accounts, and
yeah, she'll like say one thing one day and another thing the next day, and basically all the information we have about what happened like in the moment is from her. So it's like,
yes,
who knows what account is actually true.
Exactly. So we're going to give you all the information that's available. I don't know. We're going to try. So Courtney read Monster, which was written by Aileen Wuornos and Christopher Barry D. And I read Lethal Intent by Sue Russell. And then we also had a couple of online resources, an article from the South Florida Sun Sentinel and the First Amendment Encyclopedia website. So, Aileen Wuornos was born February 29th, 1956, to teenagers Diane Wuornos and Leo Pittman. Now, Diane was the oldest child of Britta and Larry Wuornos. She had 2 younger siblings who were Barry and Lori. Leo Pittman was abandoned by his biological mom and adopted by his grandparents. So he had a lot of behavioral problems as a child. He would actually physically abuse his grandmother as well.
Rude.
He was also, yes, very rude. Please don't do that. He was also a bedwetter until age 13 and was known to torture animals. So we know that's 2.
We all know it's in the triangle that kind of leads to some deviant behavior in the future.
Yes, 2 out of 3 for a future serial killer.
Yeah.
So Diane's dad, Larry, forbid Diane from dating. So he was super strict, and he had a lot of rules, and he's basically you're never going to be around a boy ever. There are reports of Diane being sexually abused by her father. She talks about a few, quote, accidental inappropriate touches that she says as she got older, she realized maybe those weren't quite so accidental. She also described a time where she had a girlfriend who was staying the night, and her dad came in the room and propositioned her. So when she was 14 with her 14-year-old friend.
Oh.
So a lot of interesting things going on in this household. And so she even hid out in a friend's attic for a couple of days to get away from her dad. And I guess the friend's parents knew she was there, but they knew what this family was like, so they just let their son keep sneaking her food and stuff because they're we're trying to protect you, we understand. So Diane and Leo start secretly dating because obviously Diane's dad is not going to let them publicly date, but they got married when she was 14 and he was 17. So they both lied and said that they were 18. That's how they were able to get the marriage license, and so she moves in with him. So then they have a son that they named Keith, and Leo starts being pretty abusive towards Diane after Keith was born. So she describes him as this, like, super, like, loving and affectionate, and then as soon as the baby's here, now he's just really abusive physically, emotionally. So they had separated when Diane got pregnant 2 months after Keith was born with Eileen. So, and Leo beat Diane pretty severely when she was in the early stages of pregnancy with Eileen. She smoked a lot while she was pregnant. Leo was arrested for providing minors with alcohol, but he decided to take the option of going into the army instead of jail time, which we know from a couple of stories we've told in the past around this time frame was like a pretty common consequence, I guess. So basically you can do this much time in prison or you can do this much time in the army. So that's what he chose. So they were divorced shortly after Diane got pregnant with Eileen, and it was granted based on Leo's history of abuse of Diane. And like I said, Eileen was born 11 months after Keith, so this is two babies very close together. I mean, you still have a baby, and now you have another baby. Like,
yeah, I really can't imagine, like, a girl I know had, like, Irish twins, where she literally got pregnant, like, 6 weeks after giving birth.
Yeah.
And I was like, I cannot imagine. Cannot imagine at all.
No. And you are 15, 16 years old at this time with an abusive husband and an abusive family at home. So,
yeah.
So this is the world that Aileen Wuornos was born into, is what I'm getting at. So several of Diane's neighbors reported, like, hearing both kids crying for, like, hours on end. One time Diane's friend showed up and, like, she, like, knocked on the door and she could, like, hear the kids inside crying, and clearly they had been crying for a long time. And when she went inside, Diane was drunk and passed out on the couch. And she's like, oh, I didn't hear them. So.
Not what you want to hear.
No. And especially, and I know I've gone on this rant before, but physical and emotional attachment in the first, like, 3 years of your life are just so incredibly important for, like, how you're going to develop as an emotional human being. And so knowing that she spent all this time crying without anyone attending to her needs it just makes so much sense for what's going to happen later in her life, just from the very beginning, before we even get into everything else there is to get into. It's just, it's really sad.
It definitely shows in the future, like, Eileen just, like, wants to be loved.
Yes.
Like, she wants to be loved and accepted for, like, who she is, no strings attached.
Yeah.
And she just kind of goes about that in all the wrong ways.
Yes.
But
so this next account is something that is a little bit different in the two books, so we're going to tell you both of them. One account says when Eileen was around 6 to 9 months old, Diane left her and Keith with a friend for the evening and never came back. And so after a week, so her friend kept these two kids for a week, and then she called Diane's parents, who came and picked them up. And so they later found out that Diane had went to Texas. So she did come back a while later and kind of had a relationship with her kids again, but then she abandoned them again at a babysitter's when they were 2 and 3 years old. And she wouldn't come back for 13 years. In the book that Eileen co-wrote, she says that in 1960, when she was 4, Diane left her and Keith with her parents, assuming that they were going to be babysitting, and then phoned later crying, saying that she wasn't coming back. So we're not quite sure exactly timeline and ages, but we do know that at least once the children were left, and Diane said that she wasn't coming back for them. So on March 18th, 1960, Diane's parents, Larry and Britta, officially adopted Keith and Eileen. But they were not told for quite a while that they were their grandchildren. So as I mentioned before, Diane had 2 younger siblings, Barry and Lori. So they all grew up together as siblings. It wasn't until Keith and Eileen were around 10 to 12-ish that they found out that they were actually Diane's children. So the oldest son, Barry, joined the Air Force when Eileen was still pretty young. So that's going to come into play later because, like, she was 10 or younger when he left the house. So he'll talk about some things that did or did not go on in the house, but he also left when she was pretty young. Mm-hmm. And Lori was only 2.5 years older than Eileen. So there's mixed accounts of what went on in the house. Some people say that all of the children were abused. Some say it was just Eileen and Keith. Most people say that Eileen and Keith did get the worst of it. They said that they were beaten with a belt on bare skin frequently, that they were verbally abused. Everyone in the neighborhood remembers Larry as just like this loud, like mean person. So Eileen smoked her first cigarette when she was 10 years old, and she would soon become known as the cigarette pig or cigarette bandit because she would perform sexual acts for cigarettes and other drugs as she got older. Which, like, when I read this, it just broke my heart for this child.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, think about, like, a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Like, you're in what, like...
5th grade. You're in elementary school.
5th, 6th grade? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you're a child.
I don't know. And just a trigger warning here, guys. It is also believed that she had sexual intercourse for the first time around the age of 9.
And that is very young.
Yes.
And there are debates later on saying whether or not she was sexually abused or raped as a child, or whether she made it up and she just had sex. But I'm like, a 9-year-old or 10-year-old, even a 13-year-old cannot fully consent to sex. Like, that is not, they are too young, they do not understand. Like, I don't care what the circumstances were, it was abuse, it was rape, if it happened at that age.
Yes.
Like,
and if you start performing sexual acts for cigarettes at 10 years old, something has happened to you. You don't make that up in your head as something to do. I'm sorry, that doesn't happen. Period. Like,
yeah, I know a lot of times, like, when they, like, hear kids who are like, oh, like, if you let me, like, do this, like, I'll let you play with my toy. It's like, okay, that kid had to have learned that somewhere. Like, you don't think, like, you don't know to do that as a child. Like,
exactly.
Something was happening, and no matter who it was, something was happening to this child.
Yes, exactly. So, like I mentioned earlier, it was around the age of 10 that Eileen found out that her, quote, older sister, Diane, was actually her mother, and that her parents were actually her grandparents. So this really, like, increased the tension in the home. And so Keith and Eileen started running away frequently and would get picked up by the police. So the grandparents would pick them up and bring them back home. The first time that Eileen was taken to juvenile hall, her grandfather refused to come pick her up. So there are also reports, again, another trigger warning, just trigger warning for this whole episode, but there are also reports that Keith and Eileen engaged in sexual acts as well. These are multiple reports from different sources that say this happened, and a lot of the neighborhood boys that were interviewed in the book that I read report having sex with her around 11 to 12 years old. And it was even said that Keith would, like, brag about him and Eileen having sex. Eileen and her siblings also would set things on fire, and once she even got burned and spent several days in the hospital and ended up having permanent scars on her face from it. And she would later end up setting toilet paper on fire at school. So just all kinds of issues going on here.
Yeah, it's a lot going on.
Yes. So Eileen began shoplifting record albums when she was a teenager, and she even shoplifted at the Kmart that Britta worked at, so that made Britta really angry because she's like, look, I've worked here for a long time, and then you're going to come in here and do this in my place of work. By the age of 12, she was a heavy drinker, and we already mentioned that she was smoking cigarettes and then started doing drugs as she got older, which was probably around this 12 to 13-year-old time frame.
Yeah, but my book was like, no, like, she was, like, drinking a lot at 12, which is very young again. Like, even if you're, like, that stupid kid in high school, like, getting a drink, like, you're still, like, 15 or 16 at that point. You're not, like, an alcoholic at the age of 12.
Exactly. And it doesn't sound like she's drinking with friends. She's just drinking to get drunk. Like, which,
I mean, also, if you do have such a bad home life, it's, like, your escape, I'm assuming, is why she did it. It's, like, something to numb or make what she's dealing with bearable, like, and that's just sad.
It's so sad. And it is speculated that she could have also been raped during these drunken blackouts as well, because, as we all know, if you get so drunk that you don't remember anything, you don't know what's happening to you. So it is possible that she was sexually abused during that time as well. So both Keith and Eileen had a close relationship with an older couple named Chief and Dixie Padlock. I don't know if these are real names or not, because my book did say at the end that some names have been changed. I know a lot of the names are accurate, but I'm sorry if these aren't. I don't know. The names aren't really relevant to the story, but what's relevant is that this was an older couple that didn't have any kids, but they would let the local teenagers come hang out at their house and they would buy them beer. So, and the drug scene there really became rampant when servicemen started returning from Vietnam, and so they were willing to engage in that with them. Both Chief and Dixie were reported to have had sex with the teenagers, including Eileen.
Which is kind of gross.
Yeah, like this is just another example of the many forms of abuse that Eileen suffered in her life.
Because again, she's a teenager. She's being taken advantage of by someone who is older who should know better.
Yes, exactly. So as I mentioned before, her grandparents were super, strict, and they wouldn't let their children date. They even refused to sign the permission slip for them to learn about sex education in school, but they would let them all go into the sauna together naked, and would sometimes even force them in there together for punishment.
That's weird.
Yep. There were also a lot of signs that Eileen was sexually abused by her grandfather as well. She tells a story of a time that he grabbed her and kissed her and shoved his tongue down her throat in front of her grandmother, which Diane also reports the same instance as well.
Yeah.
So, like I said, this whole episode is a big trigger warning, but a very specific trigger warning for child sexual abuse for this one. So now we're going to jump back to Eileen's biological father, Leo. So what's Leo doing in all of this? Well, he's not doing great things.
No.
So in September of 1962, Leo picks up a 7-year-old girl at a playground in Wichita, Kansas. He drove her to a secluded area, raped her, and dropped her back off at the playground, where he said he would kill her family if she told anyone. So she immediately went home and told her grandmother, which, good for you, you badass 7-year-old, who took her to the hospital for a rape kit, and she was able to describe the man that did this to her in such detail, including what the pattern of the seats of his car looked like, that a local gas station attendant recognized him, and they arrested him at the hotel he was staying at. So he did immediately confess to the rape. During his interview with police, he described his violence after drinking and losing his virginity to an older woman when he was 10. He was determined to be schizophrenic and sent to a mental hospital where he later escaped. He was eventually picked up on parole violations and finally went to trial in January of 1966. So at that time, only 7 of the 151 jurors were dismissed because they absolutely would not impose a death penalty under any circumstance. So I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit. It's not really relevant to this case, but I did try to look up, the percentage of people who are dismissed today because they refuse to issue a death penalty under any circumstance, but I couldn't really find any statistics since, the 80s, so that was kind of a while ago. But I did think it was interesting that only 7 of 151 were dismissed for that.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know, today.
Yeah.
What the percentage is or how many.
Yeah. So the prosecution was worried that the girl wouldn't recognize him or be able to testify because, remember, he went to a mental institution for a while before he went to trial. So it's been several years now. But they said that when he walked into the courtroom that she immediately broke into hives. She physically reacted to seeing this man.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so he went through more psychological testing, which they thought that he was faking because he would do odd things like not being able to replicate geometric shapes, even though that wasn't consistent with schizophrenia. So, if they asked him, to do something, he would, mess up every single thing. And it's okay, these aren't lining up with, the mental illness that you're supposed to have.
Yeah, that makes me think, I don't remember what I was watching or reading, but they would talk about people who were trying to, pretend to be insane, for the insanity defense.
Yep.
And how, they would know because they'd be yeah, the voices, the voices told me this, and the voices did this, and they're okay, but if you actually had this, you would not be talking like this. It's not...
Yes.
That's not the way you talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it is super interesting how they can be okay, we know you're faking it.
Yeah. Oh, it gets better. So at one point, one of the psychologists said to another psychologist, but within Leo's earshot, said that if he was suffering from what they thought he was suffering, he was going to draw an X on the next paper And he did so. Like, this ex had nothing to do with anything.
Okay.
Like, all right, here's my ex. Okay. Also, during the testing, he was unable to add up small sums, but he was later observed playing ping pong and, like, keeping score the whole time.
Oh.
So they're like, okay, so clearly you can add up these small sums that we asked you to do in this testing.
Yeah.
So he was sentenced to life in prison at hard labor, which I thought was interesting, because I'm like, I don't know what that specification means.
Yeah, I mean, do you just have to go out and, like, build things, or I don't know. That's weird.
I don't know. This was the 60s, so I don't know. But for kidnapping, rape, and sodomy. In January of 1969, he hung himself in his cell at 33 years old.
So clearly, if you got some of those genes and you got this history, this isn't a good concoction right here. Like, you know, when you make the Powerpuff Girls, you know, you have sugar, spice, and everything nice, and it ends up good. But this is not nice. This is the what were the boys? The bad boys. You know what I'm talking about? They were like three like replicates. DM us or email us or comment on our thing and tell us who it is.
Yes.
I'll probably remember by the time this comes out, but remind me and tell me.
Yep. Basically, Eileen's definitely not getting all the good things that are going to lead to a positive and fulfilling life. So she was a very talented artist as a child, but she did pretty poorly in school. At 14 years old, she was prescribed a mild tranquilizer for her outbursts. And she did have documented hearing and vision problems starting in kindergarten. Like, they believe that she was partially deaf, and that's why she was struggling so much in school. She also couldn't see the board. But her grandmother refused to have a professional evaluation done because she said, Eileen just doesn't pay attention. So I'm not going to get these fancy hearing and vision screenings done because she's just not paying attention. If she did, then she would be fine.
And I mean, I think we also know now, I mean, this is a different time, but like we know now if a child has a very troubled home life or is in distress in some form, it is going to directly affect their school. Like, you know, if the kid is being kept up all night because they're being abused and they're not sleeping, they're going to be falling asleep in class. They're going to be not paying attention, you know, like it's gonna happen. And it's probably, if she can't see also, like I remember not being able to see because I needed glasses, like you can't learn if you can't like see and hear.
Exactly. And it's like eventually you reach a point where you're just so frustrated that you don't even try because what's the point? She did test fairly low on IQ tests, and a psychologist report in May of 1970 said, quote, "It is vital for this girl's welfare that she receive counseling immediately." But her grandparents never sought counseling for her, so...
Anyone had any of these factors that Eileen had in their life, they would probably grow up to have some issues, but all of them together, like you have like your parents who not only kind of abandon you, but obviously are not good people also, and you're being abused and all this, like, and then there's a chance to maybe possibly get her on the right track with this counseling, and they just don't do it. So it's almost like she was set up for failure. Like
100% she was set up for failure. So then Eileen gets pregnant at age 14, and she did say that she was raped, but she told different stories about who it was, so a lot of people didn't believe that she really was raped.
But also, I mean, it could have been multiple people.
Yeah.
Like, from what we've heard, the stories we've heard of all the neighborhood boys saying they had sex with her, like...
Exactly. Like, she
going to a house with these old adults who were just having sex with teenagers, like...
Yeah. Clearly, there was just multiple forms of abuse going on here. There was some speculation that it could have been her grandfather or her brother. There was also a story that was told fairly repeatedly that it was her grandfather's friend. So it's unsure who she got pregnant by. But she did get pregnant at age 14, and she was sent to a home for unwed mothers where she gave birth in January of 1971 to a baby boy who was given up for adoption. So she returned home again briefly before being sent to another home for a few months. So this was like a home for kids with like behavioral issues. So she stayed there for a few months, and then after she came home, then she was officially kicked out of the house for good. Larry said that he would kill them all if they didn't leave. So Eileen and Keith lived in the woods near their house and would sleep in unlocked cars and sneak into those houses to shower occasionally after the occupants of the house went to work. So here's 15-year-old Eileen who's just given birth and been kicked out of her house, and she lives in the woods and in cars. So July 7th of 1971, Britta had been sick for a while. They didn't really know what was wrong with her, just that she was in her room a lot and she was sleeping and she just really wasn't doing well. So Larry came out of the bedroom where Britta was sleeping and asked Lori to go check her pulse and see if she was alive. And so Lori says that when she got in there that Britta's body was already cold, and so she knew that he had just sent her in there to see her dead for whatever reason, because he knew that she was dead. And Eileen would later say that this happened to her and not Lori. So I don't know, maybe they were both there, maybe not. This happened to someone,
Yeah.
probably. So the autopsy showed that she died of cirrhosis of the liver,
Yeah.
but nobody in the family knew that she was even an alcoholic. Like, they were, like, completely shocked, and apparently she had been, like, everyone knew that Larry was an alcoholic, but no one knew that Britta was as well, so she must have, like, hid it pretty well. But her body was also covered in bruises at the time that she died, so that's suspicious.
It's a little odd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Lori always wondered if she would have lived if Larry had called an ambulance for her, because she doesn't know how long Britta had been in there, like, actively dying by the time he came out. I mean, her body was cold by the time he came out, so clearly she had been dead for a while.
Yeah.
And Lori says that previously, when Britta was sick, that he wouldn't let her call an ambulance because he said that they couldn't afford it. So she's always wondered, like, okay, like, did she only die because she didn't receive medical care? Like, could something have saved her life?
Yeah.
And so Diane speculates that Larry had something to do with her death, even though it was ruled as liver disease. And Diane would return home for the first time in 13 years to go to her mother's funeral, and she saw how difficult her two children had become. She says that she tried to take them home with her, but the state of Texas wouldn't allow it because she already had two children there that social services were involved with. So they're like, no, like, he has legal custody, you can't take these kids as well. And in the book Monster, it was said that of the 13 family background characteristics the FBI found to affect later behavior of serial killers, Eileen had at least 11. So Eileen sometimes lived with Lori and her husband after they got married, but they would get into fights a lot. Lori and Eileen's friend Dawn, so this is really the only, like, friend that Eileen was ever reported having, was this girl named Dawn that she grew up with. So they would both report how poorly Eileen's, quote, friends treated her. Like, she would, like, go pick up beer and, like, come to the party, and people just were so mean to her. Couple of instances that they specifically talked about was a time when someone knocked her down with their car door and, like, didn't do anything. They just, like, walked away. And someone else hit her with their car, like, driving, hit her with her car.
What in the world?
Right? Like, didn't even check on her. Lori and Dawn both said that Eileen never said anything about it because
ignored it, yeah.
The kids would just give her a harder time for getting upset over it, so she just, like, didn't even acknowledge it. Which, again, my heart is breaking for Eileen in these years.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, she did bad things.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But up until this point in Eileen's life, it's rough. It's sad.
Yeah, it's so sad. So in 1974, Eileen was arrested in Jefferson County, Colorado, under the name Sandra Kretsch for disorderly conduct, drunk driving, and firing a .22 caliber pistol from a moving vehicle. So,
off to a great start.
Yeah, so apparently she was just, like, driving erratically and, like, yelling at people and shooting this gun out the window. But she did skip bail on that, and it wouldn't catch up to her for several years.
And you'll also see this is just the beginning of her using not her name very frequently.
Oh, yes. Eileen has a lot of aliases. A lot. Another trigger warning here, guys. Suicide coming up. Larry's father died by suicide by hanging himself in an aircraft carrier. So this is now Eileen's great-grandfather that has this history of mental illness as well. And Larry once tried to kill himself by standing in a flooded basement and turning on an electrical switch. But then on March 12th, 1976, he did kill himself by turning on a car in his son Barry's garage after Barry left for work. And so Barry found him when he got home later that evening. This is another story that Eileen would claim as her own and say that she found the body, while Barry says that he is the one that found the body. Either way, she's now lost both grandparents, but people who raised her.
Yeah, she's lost her great-grandfather, her grandfather, and her father, all to suicide.
Yes, exactly. And clearly it's coming from both sides of her genetic factor as well.
Yeah.
So a few months later, Eileen married a man named Louis Gratz-Fell. I don't know if that name's accurate. Well, she married a man who was 69 years old, and she is 20 at this time.
She's a grave robber there.
Yes. So after this time, she still went to bars every night, which made her husband mad, because he's like, we just got married and you're going out meeting men every night. And on July 13th of that year, she gets drunk and throws a cue ball at a manager of the bar.
Not a good look.
No, not great. She threw it with such force that it actually lodged in the wall where she threw it.
Yeah.
So she was arrested for assault and battery. She later beat her husband with his cane when he wouldn't give her any more money.
My book also mentioned that she came at him with a meat cleaver.
Oh, okay.
Right up to his throat, about to kill him.
Wow.
So, not a good look.
No,
not a good look.
Going great.
And here's just a random PSA that domestic abuse can go both ways, that men can be abused as well. Do not think it cannot happen, and do not be ashamed to talk about it.
Absolutely. And he was not ashamed, because he filed a restraining order and they separated. He's like, nope.
He's like, bye, bitch. We're done.
This is a big mistake. I'm out of here. So, super sad. On July 17th of that same year, 21-year-old Keith died of cancer.
Which was just crazy to me that he was that young.
Yeah. So young.
That's so tragic.
And it was in his throat, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
And they said they had been there for a few years, too.
Yeah. He had been sick for a couple years, and then it just got worse and worse. And because he was in the army, I believe, but he wasn't able to actually go forth with his career because he ended up so sick so soon. And Eileen's divorce was finalized 2 days later. So again, we're looking at this very short period where she has now lost both of the people that raised her and her older brother.
And her husband.
And her husband that she was married to for a short period of time. So she did have a string of arrests for assaults and continued hitchhiking in exchange for sex across the country. At one point, she got involved with a biker gang in Colorado, and she would report, basically luring in, the opposite gang, with her body, and then basically her gang would, beat them up, and I don't know, some crazy stuff. So when she's 25 years old, she meets 52-year-old mechanic named Jay Watts in my book. Not sure if that's actually his name, but we'll call him Jay for the sake of the story that continues next. But she met him in Daytona Beach, Florida. And in 1976, she pled guilty to assault and battery charges for the incident where she threw the cue ball at the man's head. And so she basically ended up having to pay court costs and a couple of fines. And she did get Keith's life insurance money, which was $10,000, but she spent it all in 3 months.
And that's $10,000 in 1976, which I'm sure is
right?
Even more money today. And literally 3 months it's gone.
Yeah. What are you doing with that money, Eileen? In 1978, she shot herself in the stomach in a suicide attempt. So things are just not going great for Eileen. And I realize that was just kind of a bunch of lists of years and incidents, but basically we're just getting at the gist of a lot of shit is happening in all of these years.
Yeah, because there are a lot of charges and arrests and a little bit of erratic behavior before the murders occur, so we really do want to paint that picture for you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Courtney's going to pick up with May of 1981.
Yes, so in May 1981, Eileen just throws on her bikini, she goes down to the market, and she robs it. Just in her bikini. I don't know how. I don't know where she put the stuff. Maybe she was carrying a purse. I hope so. She ain't got no pockets. Let me just put it in my boobs.
Give me all your money. Oh shit, where do I put it?
It's not funny. Robbery's not funny, guys. But she was charged with robbery with a deadly weapon. And she reports that she just felt like it was a way to test Jay's love for her. I don't know how, but I guess maybe she's like, if he stays with me, he loves me. So.
Yep. And if he doesn't, then, because, and again, goes back to Eileen's, need to be loved and cared for, and in her mind she's like, this is the only way I can know for sure if this man really loves me.
Okay.
So.
All right there, Eileen. And so they had gotten into an argument like the night before, and if he really loved her, he'd stand by her. But if he didn't, he would just abandon her like everyone else. People, please don't use this logic when you're in your relationship.
No.
So when she was arrested, they noticed there was also a warrant out for her arrest from Colorado from 1979 for stealing a $1,200 diamond ring and some other items from a woman who gave her money for a bus ticket. So she likes to steal things. So
yes.
A psychiatric evaluation would question whether she's like actually in touch with reality, because I mean, like I'm saying, like this whole, if I rob a store and my boyfriend stays with me, that means he loves me logic is not a real valid thought process.
It is not.
Yeah. So she was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Sorry guys, Jay wasn't in love with her.
Nope.
But he did care for her, and so he'd visit her and send her some money. And every time he came, she just kept trying to have sex with him when he'd visit. I don't know what was happening in this prison.
Oh, what kind of prison is this? Like,
I don't know. But he didn't want to, and his visits just kind of started to slow down. So then she placed a personal ad in a biker magazine. And I do know she had like quite a few pen pals in prison. I don't know what it is with like Diane Downs and Randy. They're all wanting like pen pals when they're in prison.
I mean, I guess you're bored. You want people to talk to, you know?
It's true. So 47-year-old engineer Ed in Maryland did start to send her money. She ended up serving 18 months this time. And then she did go to live with Ed in August of 1983. And so she claimed to be a country western singer just having trouble with her voice. And she was wrongfully imprisoned because somebody thought she was trying to steal from a fast food restaurant. So at this point, she does end up telling Ed that she's gay. But a while after, then she's saying she wants to have sex. And then during that sex, she pulls a knife on him. Oh. Actually, it was after, just so you know. She made sure they finished first.
Yes. Important things out of the way.
She did continue to just drink and take drugs, and one night after she passed out, he did have her admitted for psychiatric testing. And then after she was released from that, she decided to visit like a religious cult in North Carolina, and then she decided to go to Florida. So in 1984, she calls her sister Lori to tell her, I'm gay, I'm with a woman named Tony. She does eventually start dating Tyra Moore, and they did move around together. They lived in various hotels. They would kind of just stay in a hotel until they couldn't pay and got kicked out and then moved to the next one. I know Tyra occasionally worked as a maid in hotels, but really Eileen supported them through her sex work. They'd occasionally stayed with friends, occasionally worked some odd jobs, but it was really being supported through Eileen's sex work. Mm-hmm. So now we're going to get sad, guys. So,
yep. I mean, I was already sad, but it's going to get more sad.
Just, it's just going to be sad. So, Richard Charles Mallory was 51, and he was from Clearwater, Florida. He was last seen on November 30th, 1989. He owned a TV and VCR repair shop. So, he was divorced, and he did like to frequent strip clubs and sex workers. Known as a generous tipper, like he would just pay and be like, here's a TV, here's a VCR, thanks. Wasn't very reliable, kind of paranoid, kind of a loner. So, like, I know when he went missing, there was a few days, and they were like, well, he kind of just would go off sometimes, and we didn't really think it was that weird that he wasn't here for a few days. Like, it wasn't abnormal. But on November 26th, he was headed to Daytona with the intent of finding a sex worker. So he picks up Eileen on the interstate just outside Tampa, and she's like, hey, I'm also headed to Daytona. And she's like, by the way, here's my prices. If you want different sexual acts, here's my menu. That was a terrible joke. Okay, anyway. So They did initiate sex in like these deserted woods around 5 a.m. So she took her clothes off, and she typically made the man take all his clothes off. I'm assuming for safety measures.
Mm-hmm.
But Richard's like, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to unzip my pants. So he's in a hurry, I guess, apparently.
Well, he was paranoid, and he liked what he liked as far as sex. So he's like, we don't need to get all naked, and I can just get the job done like this. That's all I need.
Yeah. So this is where the story changes frequently. So
all by Eileen.
Yeah. So Eileen does originally say that she gave him the service, and then he attacked her. But then later she says he absolutely refused to pay. He tied her up, he beat her up, and forced a blunt object into her anus, and said, he was going to kill her, and then she broke free and shot him. So that is one story she also told. And then Eileen also said at some point that he was forceful and that she thought he was going to rape her and was kind of throwing some abuse at her. So whichever it was, whichever scenario is happening here that Eileen is telling us, he was sitting in the driver's seat, and she was standing outside the passenger door when she reached inside, grabs her bag, and pulls out a .22 caliber revolver. She's like, I know you're gonna rape me. And he's like, no, I'm not, and don't know what you're talking about. So she shot him twice. So then he crawls out of the car and shuts the door, and she came around and shot him 2 more times. So one bullet did travel all the way through his left lung and lodge into his chest cavity, and she just kind of stood there and watched him die. Which, pretty cold-hearted there.
Yep.
So she did take his ID and some cash. She put some discarded cardboard and carpeting on top of his body, and then she stole his car and tossed his clothing in the woods far away from the body. And then she did toss the rest into some dumpsters before driving back to her motel and to Tyra. So Eileen and Tyra were planning on moving out of this hotel soon and into a garage apartment, but they were still trying to save up the rest of the money they needed. And so Eileen tells Tyra that she made a lot of money the night before. This man loaned me his car and they could move. How nice. Things are coming together for this
wonderful
couple.
And I just want to add that Tyra does know that Eileen is a sex worker. So that's not like a secret or anything. Like, she is aware how she gets her money. Just FYI.
Yeah. Yeah, so they could move. And so after moving, Eileen does drop Tyra off to go to work and drives to a deserted trail on the beach about 12 miles away with her bicycle in the trunk of the car. And so she buries some items that were in the car in the sand. She tosses the keys into some bushes. She kind of wipes her fingerprints off the car. And then she just gets on her bicycle and just drives away. The car was found by the police later that day. And they quickly found the buried items, so apparently she didn't do it too well. Which included Richard's business cards, his credit cards, 2 glasses, half a bottle of Smirnoff, and some car ownership papers. So they ran the VIN number and found the car did belong to Richard. And they discovered the bloodstain in the car, and Richard was not found when they checked his apartment. So they're like, oh, it's not looking too good. And the car seat was pulled up pretty far, and they're like, all right, Richard's pretty tall. It doesn't seem like he could comfortably drive his car at this spot where the driver's seat was. So that night, Eileen does tell Tyra that she killed a man that day, and so Tyra doesn't really respond, and so Eileen started telling her details about his name, what happened. Tyra's like, stop, I don't want to know. Please don't tell me. But Eileen also gave her a scarf and jacket that had his name written on it.
Oh.
Like, I guess he wrote it, like, on the tag or whatever. And in my book, it did say, like, Tyra knew.
Yeah.
Like, Tyra heard. Like, Eileen told her, Tyra knew. Like, the cops were kind of like, there was some bloodstains in the car. Like, if you're moving, wouldn't you see that? You know, like...
Yeah.
It seems like you know something happened. And if Tyra had just called the police at this point, she could have saved a few lives. But
yeah,
this is not her story. So... A few weeks later, they did see a news report about the murder of Richard, including a photo of his car, so Tyra, like, knew Eileen was telling the truth, that she did kill this man and what happened. So, On December 6th, Eileen did pawn Richard's camera and a radar detector at a pawn shop in Daytona using a stolen ID, but she did put her thumbprint in the shop's receipt book.
Mm-hmm.
Then on December 13th, they did find Richard's body. A couple of men were looking for some scrap metal and did stumble across him. He was positively identified by his fingerprints. He had a previous DUI arrest, so they were able to link it and be like, this is for sure him. So the apartment and the store they searched, there was like no signs of foul play. They interviewed his ex-girlfriend, Jackie Davis. So they found out like he probably had a couple of cameras on him, a gold watch, a radar detector, all these things Eileen did pawn, and they obviously didn't find in the car or with his body. Mm-hmm. And there was no sign of a toolbox, even though there was like a dent in his car that looked like a toolbox was usually stored there. Mm-hmm. So they did not have a suitcase, even though Jackie said he was going out of the town for the weekend. Her son worked at the store with him, and he said that before he left. And they interviewed a few of the local sex workers, since he did like to frequent sex workers who'd last been with him. And so one woman named Chastity did have a criminal record, and she owned a .22 caliber revolver. And she supposedly confessed to her boyfriend for killing Richard. And so they're like, hey, look at this. This is easy. My job's easy.
Got it.
But they did issue a warrant for her arrest on April 5th, 1990. And then on May 25th, they found out she had been arrested in New Orleans for prostitution. And she had a warrant out for like a drug-related parole violation in Florida. So then the police interviewed her in New Orleans, and she's like, nope, I had no involvement. I know nothing. So the charges were dropped because she passed a polygraph test, and there was just no physical evidence that she was actually there. But the police did still believe a woman killed Richard because friends said he would never pick up a man who was hitchhiking, and he was also known to kind of frequent sex workers. So at this point, we do not like to talk bad about victims. Ever. And I'm not trying to, he can rest in peace, all that. But he does have a history that I think is very important in the context of this story that needs to be told.
Yes.
So we said, Richard, he likes his sex workers, he likes his strip clubs. Nothing wrong with that, just go ahead. Not judging. But he had he was a little bit of a sexual deviant. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't just like normal. So in 1957 or 1958, I saw 2 different years. I don't know. One of them.
Somewhere around there.
Richard, somewhere in the 50s. Richard had broken into a woman's house and tried to, like, fondle and sexually assault her. Mm-hmm. I think he did end up, like, grabbing her. And when the police showed up, they found him, like, with his pants down. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of, like, caught literally in the act. He pled not guilty by reason of insanity to the charge of assault with intent to rape. So he was sentenced to 4 years. But he had a psychological evaluation, so in total, he spent about 10 years in a prison mental institution in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, which, fun fact, is where my fiance's parents live.
Hi, Ebert.
Yeah, just had to include that. Hi, Anne Arundel County. Hi, Ebert. So, while he was there, he did get a job as a hospital clerk, which is a pretty cushy, good job. But he lost that job because he made a molesting gesture towards the chart nurse with sexual intent, and then he grabbed her, put his hands on her breast and between her legs. So he got fired from that job.
So this isn't a one-time occurrence with this guy, basically.
Yeah. It is also speculated that he did escape at one point and tried to abduct a young girl, but was captured shortly after because he'd also stolen a car. So, from the time he was released from this mental institute to the time of his death, he didn't really have too many, like, sexual-related crimes, but they really believe that he channeled this sexual need with sex workers. So he's like, okay, instead of trying to do this, I will pay someone, you know what I mean? Like, mm-hmm. Prostitution is not legal in the U.S., but he's trying to find, like, a better mean to do it rather than breaking into houses and raping women. Mm-hmm. So, the girl we mentioned earlier, Chastity, she did tell the police he was pretty abusive with women, and he did lead, like, the cops to some other women who were abused, including a woman named Kimberly Guy. And so Kimberly said, you know, the cops, you know about his sexual history. I've reported him before because of how violent he's been with me.
Wow.
She just said he just loved, like, brutal sex and, like, would travel with handcuffs. And said one time he attacked her and nearly strangled her to death. And she said, this is her quote, not mine, don't come at me. She said, if I had been Lee Wuornos under those circumstances, I would have shot him too. So I think this is kind of important because I don't want to get too far ahead, but it does seem like this one maybe could have more of that self-defense angle than these others do. So I do think it's important to kind of bring up his history. Not saying he deserved to die. I'm not saying any of that. It's just important to the story. So,
yes. And keep in mind, in the 80s, abusing sex workers wasn't really a thing that was, like, accepted. Like, in that no one would take a sex worker seriously if she said, hey, this guy was rough with me. Because in that time, everyone...
I mean, they still wouldn't.
True. It's a little more... People are a little more open today, but
yeah,
especially in that time... You know, it's like, oh, well, you're a sex worker, that's what you get. And sex workers even, I mean, it's incredible that Kimberly even did report it because for the most part they didn't. And it's like, that's just part of the nature of the job. And so for people to say that he didn't have any incidences between being released from the mental institution and when he picked up Eileen is like, oh, maybe he just realized where he could abuse women and get away with it more. Maybe. Again.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Chastity and Kimberly both said they were like, if you talk to, like, any of, like, the women who work at strip clubs, if you talk to any of the sex workers, we know him, we know his name, we know his face, like, we know who he is. Like, everyone does. Now we're going to talk about David Spears. So he was 47 years old, and he was divorced from his high school sweetheart, Dee. They got divorced in 1984, and they had been married for 20 years at that point. So he worked at Universal Concrete. He just enjoyed outdoor activities. He was already living with Dee again when their divorce was finalized, and he did plan on proposing to Dee after their daughter, Deanna, a lot of D names here, graduated high school. So, it's a little odd because I feel like divorce is pretty expensive. It's a lot of money to spend when I feel like you could probably just cancel that. Just not sign it. So, in 1990, David was living and working about 100 miles away from Dee and his kids, but he would go visit every weekend. And then on Friday, May 18th, David called Dee and said he would be there no later than 3 the next afternoon. So he left work at 2:10 Saturday afternoon, but he never arrived. So he did pick up Eileen up near Route 27. And Eileen says that, like, he agreed to drive her, towards the direction she was going and drop her off at some point. And those who knew David doubt that he was really willing to have sex with Eileen, but Eileen does say that they pulled off the road at Highway 19 into the woods and drank some beer together, and around 1 to 2 a.m. were naked and about to have sex when he asked her to climb into the back of his pickup truck where she saw a lead pipe. She says then he got pretty violent with her, and so she grabs her bag, pulls out her gun, shoots him 3 times. Eileen later is like, I don't know, maybe I shot him a 4th time to make sure he was dead. Forensics did show he was shot 6 times. And she did steal around $500 to $700 and left in his truck. So he had just cashed his check, and he also had money to buy his daughter a birthday and graduation present. And she stole some tools inside his truck that she could pawn. Tyra did see the truck pull up outside, and she just didn't ask any questions. She was like, all right, Eileen got another car, I guess.
Which, again, plays into the theory of what did Tyra really know?
Yeah. So, the next day, Eileen left it in a ditch and took off the license plates, because I guess in Eileen's mind, if there's no license plate, you can't track it, which it's not true.
That's not how that works.
So, on May 28th, Spears' supervisor, Red Kerr, and his wife were driving back from Nashville and saw a red truck sitting off the side of I-75 just past Gainesville. So Kerr had actually sold Spears this truck, so he quickly recognized it, which is like, what are the odds that you...
Right?
Like, that's like, kind of lucky to, like, find that and recognize it.
Yeah.
So you're able to, like, report it. So there was a spare tire and a tire jack in the back, and Kerr was like, Spears would know how to change a spare tire.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have trouble with this. But the rest of his tools weren't in the truck. So the Kerrs did call 911. And there was some dried blood found on the driver's seat, along with an empty condom wrapper. And again, this driver's seat is pulled up really far, and it seems way too close for him to be driving. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, okay, we're kind of thinking a woman again in this disappearance. So David and Dee had some problems. Obviously, they were divorced basically at this point.
Clearly, they had some problems.
Yeah. And the year before, she'd accused him of getting their son's girlfriend pregnant. So I don't know if this is one of those, like, my baby boy could never do anything wrong. It has to be you.
Right.
Or if she was ever pregnant, or I don't know.
Right. You're like, I think she might be, and it's your fault. I mean, like, okay, you're angry and accuse your husband of cheating on you. Okay, but specifically with your son's girlfriend that you now think is pregnant, that's just a really out there accusation.
And then I wonder, like, what happened for her to be like, oh, okay, never mind, let's get married again. You know, like,
it's okay.
Very weird. So David had taken out a $12,000 life insurance policy that year, so Dee didn't really qualify for any widow's benefits because they weren't married when he died, but she was the sole beneficiary of the insurance policy. So then Charles, who sometimes went by Chuck Carskaddon, he was 40. He'd left his mom's house in Missouri around 4 p.m. on May 31st, and he was heading back to Tampa to pick up his fiancée, Peggy. So he'd just gotten a job as a press operator in Missouri, and he was, you know, going to go and get Peggy, and they were going to move in together and start their life. They're kind of unsure why he stopped for Eileen. Eileen said he tried to sell her drugs, and they eventually agreed on sex instead, moved to the side of the road. Some, like, other people in my book kind of speculated that she was just hitchhiking, and he was being nice, so he just picked her up. I mean, that was really common.
Yeah.
Like, in the 80s and 90s, is like, you're hitchhiking, you know, you're a man, and you see a woman, and you're like, I'll give her a hand, like, she's going my way, I'll just drop her off at some point.
Yeah. No one in the 80s were afraid of, like, female hitchhikers. They're just like, yeah, get in. It's like, the female hitchhikers were afraid of the men who were picking them up. Like,
yeah,
men driving down the road trying to help out a hitchhiker, they weren't worried about it. Like, makes perfect sense that they would pick her up.
So it seemed also like where she was hitchhiking could have also kind of been near where, like, David's truck was dumped. So maybe, like, they kind of were like, maybe she dumped David's truck and then was hitchhiking, and this is when Charles picked her up. I don't know.
Yep.
Speculation probably, like everything in this story, except for the fact that Eileen did it. So Eileen did shoot him 9 times in the backseat of his car. To do this, she would have had to shoot him 7 times, stop, reload her gun, and shoot him 2 more times. So, kind of weird if she's going with the self-defense argument again, that you're going to shoot him 7 times, reload 2 more times. So, and then she did end up stealing his gun and his wallet. And she says he only had $20 on him, but his mom was like, no, he probably had at least $300 when he left. So she parked his truck behind their house, and Tyra would later say it was there for a couple days, but it was actually there for about 10 days. And Tyra also remembered the .45 gun Eileen brought home at this time. Again, Tyra's gotta be suspicious. I can't imagine that she would just be like, okay, you got another car. Like, you know something weird is happening.
Like, the first time you brought home a car for a couple of days and then it disappeared, you told me you murdered someone and it was his car, and I know for a fact that that's true because I saw it on the news, and now you've come home with 2 more random vehicles that sit here for a few days and then leave again. Like, what do you think's happening, Tyra?
On June 1st, a body was discovered off the road, and it was so decomposed, like, police at first couldn't really tell age, sex, cause of death, anything. They did question the man who found the body because he was kind of acting odd and kind of changed his story several times about, like, what he was doing there. And eventually just admitted he was just looking for a place to masturbate. So he's like, I
Off in the woods.
Just wanted to kind of jerk it off. I didn't.
Yep.
Anyway.
Didn't expect to find a body doing that.
I know, right? Like, that would be, like, scarring. You're like, I'm just going to roll over. I'm just going to masturbate. And then you're like, oop. All right, gonna keep driving.
I bet he really struggles with masturbation now. Like, you gotta have a lot of things tied up in that now.
Yeah, he's not gonna do that again, I can guarantee you. So they really had nothing to, like, identify the body, and they did receive a local bolo, which is be on the lookout, describing a man named David Spears, who could be him. So then on June 7th, David Spears' dental records did confirm the identity of the body. And then on June 6th, another body was found in the woods. The time of death appeared to be approximately 5 days from before, with a .22 caliber gunshot wound, but there was no way to identify the body. So at this point, we are going to end part 1.
Yes.
We're going to leave you on a little bit of a cliffhanger because there are a few more victims. There's a few more investigations and trials, all that. So we're going to leave you right here.
There's a lot left for part 2. Don't worry.
And we've given you a lot right now, looking at the timestamp right now from our episode. So you will get that next episode next week or right now if you're a Patreon. So yeah, and that is the beginning story of Eileen.
Whew. All right. Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
Okay. My perk of the week is today I got to go golfing with my parents and with Kevin.
Ooh.
And it was a lot of fun. Don't worry, it was very socially distanced. Those like starting places are very far apart. So it was just the 4 of us, and we were always at least 170 yards away from somebody else.
More than 6 feet.
Yeah, and I haven't played golf since, like, last year, and so I was like, whew, I'm going to be really bad. But I actually did pretty good.
Good.
I never got par, but I did get close one time. It's like a par 3, so 3 is pretty ambitious for me. But yeah, so we are going to end up going on vacation with Kevin's family in August. It's at like a lake house, so we're probably just going to sit in the house all day, but it is on a golf course. So we're like, okay, maybe we can go golfing. So I got to up my game so I don't embarrass myself in front of my future brother-in-laws. Because trust me, they will roast me. But yeah, and so we're going to try to do it more. But it was just really fun to get outside and get to golf and have fun and not be inside and get some sunshine. And it was a perfect day for it because it was kind of cloudy. So it wasn't too hot.
Nice.
And it was just really nice. It was a good day.
That sounds nice.
Yeah, so Jaclyn, what is your perk of the week?
Well, I already talked about it at the beginning of the episode, and I'm pretty sure I talked about it the last, 2 weeks, but Andrew and I did go up to the mountains here at the Shenandoah National Park for our 8th wedding anniversary this past weekend, and...
Yes, she is a child bride.
Yes, I got married very young, but we usually would travel at least, 1 weekend a month, so this is June, and we haven't gone anywhere since November, which is never happened in the 8 years that we've been married that we've gone this long without a trip somewhere. So it was super nice, and we took the dogs with us. So like I said, we went on a hike, and so we got to take them hiking, and we rented this super cute little farmhouse that was on 7 acres. So we were able to take the dogs out to play, and they have private access to this little river. So I was able to sit out there and drink my coffee and listen to the river, and you can walk to the national forest from the Airbnb that we stayed at. So we were able to walk the dogs up there, and so just same thing as Courtney, getting out of the house and fresh air, and it was super nice. So that was my perk of the week.
That sounds nice. Yeah, I know what you mean about not traveling, because Kevin and I had so many trips planned. We were supposed to come see you, which you guys heard us talk about way early in the podcast, and that didn't happen. And we were supposed to go to Nashville to see Morbid live, the podcast, which we love, and we'll endlessly talk about how much we love them, even though they're not going to sponsor us anytime soon. But
if you guys want to do a collaboration, let us know, because it would make our whole lives.
Yeah, but I was supposed to go to that in May, and they canceled it, and from their episodes, it sounds like the September one's probably. Going to be canceled and rescheduled too. But, so there was a lot of trips coming up, and we just always travel and stuff, and yeah, it's just kind of been like, at first it was nice because we hadn't traveled so much. You know, in November we traveled like 3 weekends straight in a row, I think it was, or, you know, something like that. But, you know, so it was nice at first. I was like, oh, this is nice, we could just chill at home and all that. And now, like, month 3, I'm like, this apartment's ugly, it's so ugly. I loved it at one point, now it's ugly.
I need to get out of here.
But
just a reminder that we are still running our contest, so trying to get 100 followers on Instagram and 50 reviews on Apple Podcasts. So once we get each of those, we'll do a drawing, and you guys will win a Caffeinated Crimes sticker, a pin, and a $10 gift card to a coffee shop of your choice. We already plugged the Patreon twice, so I'm not going to plug it again. Y'all know it's there. But you can email us at caffeinatedcrimespod@gmail.com, and you can also find us on Instagram at caffeinatedcrimespod.
Yeah, and so go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.